to the PR Wind Down podcast, the show for public relations professionals who are ready to see real change in the PR industry. We are your hosts, April Margulies and Laura Schooler. Let's get ready to wind down.
All right, Laura, you ready for the horror story?
Yes, let's hear it.
Okay. April, Laura, hello. What do you do when you have a client that lies? What an opening. He's a nice guy normally, very ambitious. He has founded a couple of successful startups and one of them even IPO'd. He has a new, quote, tech baby now, as he calls them. He's very passionate and always willing to do interviews, but I almost wish he wouldn't. When he really gets on a roll, he tends to exaggerate. He'll ballpark the company headcount about 25% too high, or claim he did a project for 10 years when it was really only 7, or say he's founded 5 companies when it was really only 3, et cetera, et cetera. Oh my God, I've had this client. That's me, sorry. I don't know if it's intentional or if it's more delusions of grandeur. He also does have real expertise and accomplishments, but he inflates them big time. So we've tried detailed prep sheets with scripts for common questions. We've repeated media trainings and fact sheets for him to reference. It doesn't matter. He goes off the rails. A couple times now, I've had to correct those fibs post-interview with the reporter, but I'm worried about his perceived credibility, and we have started to pitch him for more top-tier ops. Quote, trade.com, unquote, might be cool with a correction, but God forbid it happens with TechCrunch, you know? Thanks, ladies! 8 exclamation points.
That's a pain in the neck, man. I think that sort of like parenting, this might be a little bit of a case of tough love. You got to keep doing what you're doing in terms of prepping this guy, you know, ahead of time and with the fact sheets and all that. And you're going to have to try to correct things that are inaccurate afterwards, it sounds like. But one of these times, it's going to blow up in his face, and maybe that's when he's going to learn. And you know what? Maybe not, and maybe he doesn't care. And that's actually not anything you're going to be able to do with it, depending on how intent he is on continuing to exaggerate. It might just be like a lost cause. So you can just the best that you can.
My sense of it from having had a client that was similar is that it's just the personality of this person.
Right.
I think it's not media specific. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that this is a person who literally just can't help but inflate and aggrandize everything that he does. It is probably partly a sense of self-importance, but it's probably also just a communication style, that it's just a salesy kind of person.
Right. I wonder if he thinks it's because it's just like a more interesting, exciting story. So you're like, yeah, 8,000 people work for me when it's, 800. And I wonder if you come up with real interesting stories about his company or life, or if he feels he's got interesting stories, I wonder if exaggerating these numbers or whatever would diminish.
It's a good question.
Probably not, but that's
probably not. I mean, I do think though, if you got the real stats and you pitched them and got stories, then you might want to remind him in the prep sheet that you put together that as covered in Business Insider, because right. I even had a client who changed the numbers of the funding announcement in the media, and it didn't match the press release or what we had been told. And it was like, I guess the new number's that? I don't think you can't, because it was higher. So, I mean, there is something.
Well, really... if a reporter goes and checks that out.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think listing the stats in the briefing doc is smart. And then maybe they said they've been doing the repeated media trainings and fact sheets.
Right. I mean, you got to keep doing it. Like I said, come up with some new stories.
And then I think just remind him before every interview, the last time that you were interviewed about this, it was this number. I know things are always changing, but let's just make sure that we're consistent for anybody who's going to go back and look at the numbers that were published in TechCrunch versus business.com versus Business Insider. Yeah, I think you just have to remind him of the potential consequences of changing numbers when it comes to press, and say, no, it's really no big deal in conversation, but if they write it down and it goes out and it's published, it's there forever. So let's just make sure the numbers are something we can stand behind and substantiate.
Right.
And then if he keeps doing that, I think your only other option is fire the client or seek a replacement executive to do those interviews. Stop putting him in front of the camera or in front of the reporters.
Right.
Give the spotlight and the mic to somebody who's more consistent. I don't know if there's anything else that can be done.
Like I said, there might be some like falling flat on your face learning, but or not. I mean, there's people like this who just won't ever learn.
Right. And then, yeah, you just move on.
Yeah.
Or just let them suffer the consequences because they said it.
Right.
And it wasn't your fault. You can't control everything everyone does. So you can only give them your best advice and create the opportunities for them. And if they flatline or, blow themselves
or flat out lie.
Flatline or flat lie. That's on them. That's not on you. You gave them the statistics. Yeah. And keep a paper trail and seal it in your blood, right? Like, I mean, make sure you have all those briefing documents with all those fact sheets and all the emails sent to him in case, God forbid, it comes back to bite you in the butt.
Yep.
So you can CYA, as they say. Yep. I think that's my best advice on that. Anything else, Laura?
No, that's all.
Nothing else to school the kids with? So our guest today is Mandy Menaker. She's the global head of PR at ClassPass, a subscription service that connects people with fitness classes like yoga, Pilates, martial arts, and more. She has over a decade of experience as a brand and marketing consultant, having worked with brands like Shaper, Fluent City, and New York Film Academy. We are very excited to have her today, and I'm excited to chat through how things have changed communications-wise throughout the pandemic and now into 2021, where we're post-pandemic. And then what do you think is going to happen in the future when we're really post-pandemic? So we can kick
this pandemic.
Right, exactly. So we can kick things off there and kind of just see where it goes.
Yeah. So it's funny that you say pandemic, post-pandemic, because we're still very much in the pandemic.
Yeah, that's why for people not with the video, I was using really big air quotes.
But it actually is really interesting because ClassPass is in 30 countries. And so where we're at in the pandemic is very different in how we're telling the story from a communications perspective based on where you are. Mm-hmm. And so throughout the pandemic, it's been this whole wave of different lockdowns, different closures. And there's also been these really great gems and moments where studios are able to reopen, people are heading back to classes, we get to tell this really positive story. And so it's very much day to day been such a question of, okay, where is this journalist asking questions from? What's happening in that country? What's the story that we can tell that day?
And it's probably changing in both directions all the time, right? Where we're open, no, we're not, just kidding. We're open again. No, we're not, just kidding.
So wait, before we get into it, can you explain to everybody what ClassPass is?
Absolutely. So ClassPass is a membership that aggregates all of the top fitness and wellness experiences into one app. So using ClassPass, you can book experiences, fitness classes such as boxing, boot camps, bar, yoga, strength training, and wellness appointments. So massage, facials, pedicures at more than 40,000 businesses. As you can imagine, we are a very in-person focused business. And so at the start of the pandemic, it was almost overnight, 95% of the businesses that we work with had to close their physical spaces. And we're in 30 countries. And so we saw this happening in a few countries, and then it was almost overnight, everyone was closed. And so we had to pivot very quickly to, okay, two things. How are we going to make sure that we can send revenue and money back to the partners in our network and keep these businesses open? And then the second was, how are we going to make sure that our global community can stay active? And
Mhm.
so it was this really interesting journey where within 10 days, we launched the ability for studios to do online classes through our platform, to be able to market streaming workouts. And then we also made the decision from the get-go that we were going to, for 5 months, waive all commissions and all that revenue directly back to the partners. We also launched a donation matching campaign. And so we were really trying in those first months to make sure that as much as we could, we were keeping people active and we were making sure these businesses had revenue.
Right, because if they fail, then you fail and you're all in it together, right? So where are you now? Well, literally, where are you? Are you in New York?
I am in New Jersey, but I'm the only in-house PR person for the 30 countries that we're in. And so on a given day, wherever that story is, that is very much dependent on just where the story is that day, and that's where I put my focus.
Mhm.
So are you aggregating like independently owned or small types of gyms? Or do you also have like Equinox or New York Sports Club in your network?
We work with those small gyms where there's maybe one location and it's, this mom and pop owned shop. But we also work with nationally known and internationally known fitness chains.
Okay.
So what's nice about ClassPass is that there's really something on there for everyone. And whether you're looking for something that's local in your community, if you're traveling abroad, if you are somewhere for business, there's always going to be an activity or an experience that you can book.
That's awesome. And how do you think communications are going to permanently change, or will they, based on how things have shifted here?
Yeah. So it's definitely been different phases of communication. So the very beginning, I think it was really about how do we communicate what we're doing? What's happening with the fitness industry? Are we going to be doing online classes? Are we pausing memberships? What's happening? And so I think the very beginning phase of communication for the pandemic was just making sure that both our community of members and our community of studios, but then also journalists understood what are the different changes we're making to our policies. So that was very much phase one, which is here's what's happening. We just need to make sure that our community is the first people that we're notifying. The second phase of communications was very much what's happening in the industry. And as a company that works with 40,000 businesses, we have this very unique position where we can say, okay, here's the trends that we're actually seeing. And so the second phase of the pandemic became really about making sure that we were communicating these are the different trends that we're spotting. And trend building is super interesting because when you're building trends, there's never a computer that's just going to say, these are the things that you should be writing about, or these are the trends that you should be saying. And so you're really sitting in a room trying to figure out, okay, what are the trends? And then looking for the data to support that and say, does that actually make sense? And a huge part of the work that I do is meeting people across the business. And so I'm checking in with the people in business intelligence. I'm checking in with the people in our corporate program. I'm checking in with the people in our marketing department and just saying, hey, what campaigns are you running? What surveys are you running? What has been interesting from the past month? Are you putting together any top level summaries for your team that I could take a look at? Is there anything you're building for an investor that could be potentially interesting? And so a huge part of the work that I've been doing during the past 2 years is really looking for where do we see things changing, and then finding the data to support that story and getting that story out there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. How are you surviving without a team? Do you have an agency, or are you still flying solo across 30 countries all by yourself?
So we have one agency in the UK, Rebecca Abigail Agency. They're great. And then I'm our entire US agency.
Ooh.
It has been in some ways, a really great thing that I have been so busy and have had all these stories to tell. And especially because when you're telling a story of things that are changing, there's, things are busy. The thing that is nice is that the story, again, is not ever going to be in the same place on a given day. So what I mean by that is that, for example, in the UK, they had a national reopening. And so we could easily look at the data and say, okay, so within the week that studios reopened, there was a 600% week over week increase on new members. We saw that one of the studios that was performing the best the week before for digital got 10 times the amount of reservations for in person when they were able to reopen. And so that was a great story that we could package and we could share with the Guardian and the Telegraph, and we could share with Marie Claire and all these places to say, here's what's happening. But that's not always the case. There's not always that kind of easy built-in story. So in the US, for example, because things have opened so piecemeal and it's city by city and it's county by county, and maybe one county has reopened classes and another one is requiring a vaccine mandate and another one has a mask mandate, and it's so different place to place. We've had to look for ways that we can tell that story and make sure that journalists are going to be excited about, now's the moment I want to talk about fitness. And so with that, that's kind of this third phase that we've had to get into, which is how do we tell the story? Things are looking actually very promising right now. People are starting to head back to studios. And so we've had to say, how do we share that story? What does that comeback look like? And so in the same way we built those trends reports earlier in the pandemic, where we were able to point to things like lunchtime is the new workout, we then looked at, okay, what is the data we can package into a report? We called it the comeback report, and then use that to basically say, this is the reason that now is the moment you should be talking about fitness studios. This is the way that we can make this a story. This is the way that when there's not that clear moment of everyone is going back to studios on the same day, we at least have fresh stats to share to say, this is why it's a good time to talk about it.
Right. And how do you keep finding these fresh angles for yourself when you're running solo as the only PR person in the US?
Lots of coffee. No, I'm really lucky to work with an incredible team. So even though I'm the only PR person, we have really smart data scientists. We have incredible business intelligence people. We have incredible marketers, and so I'm always reaching out to those folks to say, what trends are happening? Can you tell me if there's anything fun that you've spotted? And it could be the smallest thing that ends up making a story. And so, for example, we saw that during the pandemic, people were most likely to book a beauty appointment. So like a beauty appointment being like a manicure or pedicure on a Sunday. And so we were almost able to build this narrative around, okay, so maybe people are staying home and it's the one day a week that they're leaving their homes and they're doing this one thing for themselves and they're heading back then into lockdown. But then what we've seen more recently is that we are actually now booking beauty appointments on Friday. And so we're back to wanting to look our best before the weekend. And there's the whole story there of people are getting ready to see people. They're getting their blowout, they're getting their manicure. Maybe they have, a small celebration that they're attending that week after not seeing people for 2 years. Sometimes it is something I'm specifically looking for. And so I might say, okay, here's a trend that I think really could be interesting, but I need to make sure the data is there. And then sometimes the trend evolves naturally. It's almost like you have to do this fun detective work of saying, this is the trend I think could work for a journalist. This is what I think could be pitchable. Is that a real trend? Do we have the data to support that? And there are times where I'm like, this could be so great. This could be the best story. And they're like, yeah, but either the data match or we have no way to tell that story.
Right. Did it take a lot of training of your team to explain to them what you need to, what's PR worthy? Or did they kind of get it right away?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is just building relationships across an organization, because you really have to advocate for yourself as a PR person. There's never going to be someone, there are the rare companies where maybe the CEO loves PR and it's their number one thing and they say this is the priority and we need to really focus on this. But at the majority of businesses, especially if you work at a business that has several hundred employees, you as a PR person have to say, okay, this is my goal. How do I get there? How can I find that information? And so I've really had to, say to people, I respect your time. I know you're working on 15 other projects. I would really love your help looking at this one stat, or could you help provide a quote? I think a big part of that is also creating as low lift for them as possible. So when I reach out to someone, I will already say, this is what I think we can pull. This is what I think the stat would look like. This is what I think the search would look like. I try to think like the person who'd actually be pulling that and say, here's how I think we would get to that number. Is that possible? So if I'm working with an executive or someone across the business to actually put together a quote, I'll try to outline something for them ahead of time to say, are you comfortable with this? Am I getting this right? And then let them put that in their own words.
Very cool. Laura, any other questions for her before we ask our typical closing questions?
Well, I guess it's more of a statement. It's just that how important data and coming up with interesting storylines using data is for reporters, because A, they don't have it, or B, they don't have the time to do it themselves. So it's just a huge driver of, getting PR coverage, and you should always try to get a client that creates data.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for a lot of journalists, if you don't have something that's new. So maybe you're a company that if you have a lot of launches, maybe there's something interesting to talk about.
Right.
But if you're a company that doesn't have a ton of launches, you need to find your way into a story and be able to provide something that's going to be helpful to that journalist. And so I think with data, it's really anticipating what is that journalist going to be writing about?
Mm-hmm.
How can I find the data that's going to help them tell that story? And how can I also package that in a really helpful way? And I sometimes, see these things that are these like humongous 47-page reports going around where someone's like, we've just created all these insights and how great this is. And they're sending it out to a journalist. Like, maybe that serves a purpose. And maybe there is someone that you're building that content for. And that's great. But when you're reaching out to the journalist, you want to be as concise as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And try to find what are the 3 stats that you can put into bullet points to send to that specific journalist that they're going to cover. And, it's not the same stats for every person. And so it's thinking through, okay, I know that this person is specifically interested in the fitness industry, and they're going to want to know what are the top 3 classes that people have gone back to, or what, whatever it is that the stats are that you're looking for. Try and package that very, very simply. And then that gives you the opportunity to say, would you like to get onto a call to chat through these stats and provide more insight? Would you like me to be able to set up a conversation where we can dig in a little deeper?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very smart. Cool. Well, Mandy, any questions for us or anything you want to plug?
Nothing that I want to plug at the moment. I think the biggest thing that I'm excited to tell is just that we are seeing, studios make a comeback right now. And so I'm just really excited to keep telling those stories.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. This is great.
Yeah. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you. You
Bye-bye.
too.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, April, ready to kick off the next segment?
Let's do it.
Questions clients always ask during media training.
Well, I feel like they always ask about attire. What should I wear? Or they're asking a lot about their backgrounds. What should be behind me?
That's a good one. This has changed in the past year and a half or so, because almost every interview has taken place virtually. And so it's sort of interesting, because there used to be phone interviews happen all the time. That when we were going to work in person and to interviews in person, there were a lot of phone interviews. However, there were also a lot of in-studio or in-office interviews too, and those went away. So when those went away, not only did those formerly in-person interviews start taking place on Zoom, etc., but the things that used to be just on the phone also turned into Zoom. So now everything is visual. Where before it was like, especially in business, like less than half was visual.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like everything, 95% is probably visual.
Mm-hmm.
So the question that clients always ask, and what you should be prepared for now when you're doing media training for your client, is what should the background look like? How should the lighting look? And what should I wear?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a whole different world, right? Then we would
Mm-hmm.
no journalist would ever do a Zoom call before the pandemic, ever, because it would look horrible. So you can get those lighting rings to put, in front of your computer so that you look better. And then put something behind you that is maybe about your company, or at least is a very tasteful sort of bookshelf with books and flowers, or a piece of art or something like that. It was funny, a guy that I work with sent an email to us today and was like, do not let your clients ever do this. It's like, 18 months into the pandemic, and this guy sounded horrible and looked horrible, and his background, the reporters on the interview were like, oh my God, are you in a lineup? They actually said that on the live interview, because it was so bad. There was his shadow against a dirty off-white wall, and that was all it was. He had those an earpiece in, he sounded horrible. It was terrible. And then basically the reporters made fun of what he looked like, what he sounded like, and were like, dude, really? Like a year and a half into this thing and you haven't figured out what to look like? Yeah. So don't even wait for your clients to ask the question. You need to say, where are you going to be sitting? And let's see what it looks like. And let's see what you sound like. And we might need to get you a microphone, and we might need to tell you to get lighting, and we might need to adjust your background, and you need to make it look TV ready, because it could be, even if it's not live TV, it's taped, or they could take a snapshot and put it on social media or on the website for the outlet or whatever.
For sure.
Interesting. Thank you for making me ask that question, because I really wasn't thinking that, but it's on the top of everybody's mind now.
It's on the top of everybody's mind. Yeah. And they're still asking the questions of what color should I wear? You know, should I wear a suit and tie? Should I not wear a suit and tie? The answers to that is whatever's on brand, right? I mean, it's always better to be more formal than less formal in an interview. But if you're a Silicon Valley tech startup CEO and you're wearing a suit and tie, don't, you know, if it's not
right
on brand for you, if you're, you know, a disruptor and you're more of a hoodie kind of person, I mean, maybe wear a $100 hoodie instead of a $25 hoodie, you know, like maybe step it up, and, you know, but also I know Laura's made the point before, if you're not Mark Zuckerberg, you can't wear a hoodie on Zoom calls. So,
well, if you're doing an interview, you can't, unless you're like in that world. But on meetings now, I mean, I've sort of like let it go, because unless you're meeting with a client that you know that you really got to read the virtual room.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that clients ask like, okay, so now when am I going to get into Forbes magazine? Right? Like you do media training and they're like, okay.
Oh, they do ask a lot about when they're going to be on CNN or something.
Right.
How do you manage expectations when clients think, oh, I'm in media training, I'm going to be on CNN or Bloomberg tomorrow?
Right. Because they're like, well, we're doing this, like, let's do it. This is great. Most people do pay attention and like it better than they thought they were going to like it, in my experience.
Yes.
So then they're like, this is so easy. Oh, well, this is so great. Whatever. I'm a big star now. Let's go. Woo, you know? Well, so there's two things. Sometimes I don't do media training until I actually have a media opportunity. So I'm really training them for the opportunity. So that sort of helps, because they're going to be like, well, what am I going to be in the media? And you'd be like, well, in 3 days, that's why we're doing this. Right. But if they're just going to be in a trade publication or whatever, and they're like, well, when do I get to do the big stuff?
Yes.
I mean, you answer them the way you would answer them, because you get that question from, you know, clients all the time, right? Well, you know, we're building the story, we have news, we have a strategy, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, targeting, you know, these reporters, and we're going to continue to work on it, and we'll see. I mean, I, you know, can answer that question 50 different ways.
Right.
That wasn't a very good answer I just gave. We'll see. We'll see.
I mean, depending on where they are in their life cycle, if they're a startup and they don't have any brand recognition, it's going to take some while to create a groundswell of interest and get their name out there before they're ready for national press. And if it's a bigger company that's further along, you know, the next time you have a big funding announcement or a big launch, or the next time something happens in the news where we can newsjack it and insert you as a source of expert commentary about what's happening, but we don't know when those things are going to happen. So we have to be prepared at all times to insert you into whatever happens that's relevant to X industry.
There you go.
I think that's a better response than we'll see.
You know, we're doing some stuff. We'll see.
We're doing some stuff.
I did have a client ask me about that today. And I said, we've got this announcement that we're talking to your client, my client's client, in 2 days. And then we've got that other blog post that your in-house guy is talking to your tech guy about. Yeah. And so we'll have both a new announcement and sort of like interesting tech information. And we're going to be running at it to a couple of different places on the tech business and like the business side. And so you've been getting a lot of coverage already. We've been getting some, you know, good interviews for you. And we have, you know, we'll get there. I mean, this is now that we've got some real like new new interesting information, I think there's a really good shot, and we're going after all those kinds of publications.
All right, so last segment of this episode, and our PR News of the Week is about this gentleman who was covered in the Wall Street Journal. So, Laura, you heard about this, right?
Yeah.
So basically, for years, Robert Shireman has been accused of corruptly sharing insider information with investors while serving as a federal official. And the claims aren't true, but they continue to live on as published in the Wall Street Journal.
So whenever somebody searches his name, like these stories come up and people
Yep.
think he's a lying fraudster or whatever.
Yep. And so he never did these things, but he tried to reclaim his reputation by asking the Wall Street Journal to correct the story it published about him in 2013. Even though there's no evidence to support any of the claims, despite 2 federal investigations, they decided to not accept his request to correct the story or even re-report it.
So do you know, was he like acquitted of charges or found innocent of something, or it was just like there was talk about it and then it never came to fruition?
It looks like, so there were claims that as a top official in the U.S. Department of Education, he illegally provided information to a hedge fund investor who was seeking to make big money by betting against the stocks of for-profit colleges.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently there was no, despite 2 federal investigations, he was never indicted. So the words live on the internet, and it's fueled more false claims, including years later in the pages of the journal itself. And I guess he's trying to say that his ordeal demonstrates how Washingtonian hardball politics collide with the permanence of the web.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like false claim that keeps being reported years after it's been disproven. I mean, this is very ballsy that he decided to come out and talk about this, despite the fact it's going to make his SEO even worse. In a way, I mean, at least he's feeling he has to tell his side of the story, but it's certainly not going to help his Google search engine findings.
I think this happens to people a lot. I mean, not specifically the same story, but where they have negative media coverage out there that is, either not true or that's like old news, or, there's a whole host of things. And that's one of the problems with the web. And I've had a lot of clients and people that I know come to me and say, how do I get rid of this? And there's companies that do it, but it takes a long time. It's not easy and it's very expensive, basically, to try to get it so that those things don't come up on the first page, if somebody searches your name, right? I don't know what the Wall Street Journal's reason for not correcting the story is, but maybe they think that he in fact is guilty, for lack of a better word. Or maybe they're thinking, well, this is the story that we wrote at this time, and that was the story of the day. They're not going to go back and be revisionists. Otherwise, how many stories they would have to go back and change?
Well, that's true, because, I mean, you always write about allegations.
Why they're not, maybe, if they did a short story talking about what he's doing now and that he was never found guilty, that would have been nice. But if they don't find it newsworthy or applicable to what's going on now, then it's not a high school newsletter, like they're the Wall Street Journal. So for whatever their reasons are, I don't know, does it say?
Well, it does down here. So it says in July, Shireman received a reply from Jay Sapsford, the Wall Street Journal's deputy Washington bureau chief. In an email reviewed by NPR, Sapsford wrote that the paper and others at the time were covering, quote, how financial actors were seeking information that would give them advantages in trading securities, and how easily such information flows among agency officials, congressional aides, lobbyists, purveyors of political intelligence, and investors themselves. We determined this flow of information to be a useful background to the developments of this story, and we stand by that judgment. Shireman points to that response and nearly sputters in incredulity, especially given his respect for the news side of the paper. and the inspector general had explicitly exonerated department officials, including Shireman, of sharing sensitive information outside of the department. So what's interesting to me also is that there's been a principle at work, especially in recent years, but always, that the first person to report something controls the narrative, regardless of whether it's factual. So whatever the first story is that comes out tends to be what sticks in people's minds. And undoing that with a correction is much harder, basically impossible. And so there's been this kind of race, especially in political communications. There's been a race to try to get the information out first, regardless of whether it's true. But the problem with that is, like, you could really damage people's reputations forever. I think that that's something that, just the way that news has gone, that it's more about the immediacy than it is about the accuracy.
Right.
What we're seeing for this poor guy, how many people are going to come forward? Because this is what, 2009? How many people are going to come forward in 2040, 2050, whose lives were completely ruined by somebody rushing to print with something for whatever reason, to be the first to the story, to get the social buzz? I think it's pretty sobering, honestly, to see this guy come forward. And I mean, honestly, I have no idea whether he's guilty or not guilty. I feel like it's a pretty big stake in the ground to come forward if you know you did something wrong. But still, I mean, regardless, I think it's just a reminder to everybody in strategic communications to take a beat and think through the repercussions for all people involved before pulling the trigger on something that could have lasting consequences for someone. And I got in trouble as a reporter because I ended up publishing a list of all the Johns that had been caught through a prostitution sting.
Right.
And my editor was fine with it. But apparently the newspaper got a lot of flack because it ruined the lives of the 15 men or whatever it was, and their marriages, who were caught as part of the prostitution ring. Now, it's public information. Was it the wrong thing to do? I don't know, but I got reprimanded. I mean, I was young. I was like, I got the scoop.
Right.
There was this big sting. I published all the name, like, it
right.
was,
You play, you pay. Like what? Right.
I thought I was doing good journalism.
Well, were you not though?
Honestly, I mean, this is the moral ethical question, right? Was I or wasn't I? Was I helping the women who were with these men and not knowing what they were doing? Was I ruining the lives and marriages and reputations of professional businessmen? At the time, I thought it was the right thing to do. I still, to this day, don't know if it was the right thing to do.
I don't know enough about, I mean, I was never a reporter, so I don't know about like when you use somebody's name and when you don't and all of that. But
I was a crime reporter. I was
right.
on, use the name of the people that were arrested.
Right. So I'm not really sure why you got reprimanded.
And my editor was the one who signed off on it.
Right. It wasn't like you just like.
I was 23. Like, was it my fault or was it? No, I didn't just write it.
Right.
It still haunts me sometimes thinking about whether it was right or wrong. I don't know. I think the point here is just to be really careful, whatever you're putting out there and whatever you're promoting. Mm-hmm. And if your clients are promoting something that could be really damaging to somebody, do you want that karma, right? Do you want that blood on your hand? Do you want to be part of the thing that sunk somebody's life?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's something that I think a lot of people might not think about when they go into reporting. And it's really the problem with the internet, because this stuff happened a lot, but it was very hard to find. You had to really go after finding information about somebody, 10 years later. Now you can just like, bloop, and it all comes up, right?
Right.
It's very easy to all of a sudden your name is connected with something that you don't want it to be connected with on the internet. And anybody a job interview, a person you're interested in dating, whatever, can look you up and see something and be like, oh, hell no.
No, and what's scary to me too is just the rate at which people can tank somebody's reputation on social media by just saying something about them that's not even true. Or trying to cancel
or that
them.
They did when they were 15 and now they're 37.
Yeah.
Right, I know.
And I just think we have to be careful, even as individuals, letting our emotions run away with us and trying to ruin somebody, because those are people
with lives.
Somebody's father, that's somebody's boss, it's somebody's employee, it's somebody's brother, it's somebody's
husband, friends, whatever.
It's a person. And I just think we have to remember that as individuals and communicators. And it kind of goes back to what I said about the horror story from last episode, which is that, you can make fun of people all day long for making mistakes, but when it's your mistake, maybe take a harder look at whether or not you want to keep making fun of people.
Right.
Nobody's perfect, we're all working on it, or hopefully we're working on it. Some people aren't working on it, but then the world's going to make them work on it. So either way, they're working on it proactively or not, right?
Yeah. Whether or not you want to.
By choice or force.
Right.
Either way, it's happening.
Exactly.
It's coming for you. Oh man. Well, that was kind of a bummer note to end on. Do we have something peppier?
And then there's Kitty by the refrigerators to get warm.
Always.
Are you hungry again, lady?
Passed out.
You ate everything? Oh my goodness.
She's like, stop feeding me fruits and vegetables. I want pizza and candy.
Her eating habits are as bad as mine.
Thank you for tuning in for the PR Wind Down podcast.
And thank you to Mandy for joining us for today's interview.
Remember to submit your own agency stories and questions, and please share our show with your friends and colleagues. If you subscribe and leave us a rating, it will also help us reach new listeners like you.
And if you have an anonymous PR horror story of your own, send it our way at the contact email below the episode notes.
Can't wait to wind down with you again next time.